The heavy, polished mahogany double doors of the probate courtroom shut with a dull, echoing thud that seemed to vibrate directly through the cold marble floor tiles beneath my feet. The air inside the room was thick, carrying the suffocating scent of old parchment, stale dust motes dancing in the pale afternoon sun, and the clinical, sterile aroma of high-priced legal maneuvering. I sat perfectly still at the far end of the defense table, my hands clasped loosely over a plain black leather portfolio, a solitary figure anchored against a rising tide of calculated greed. Across the short, carpeted aisle sat my younger sister, Alyssa, her posture entirely draped in an ostentatious display of designer mourning silk, her face arranged into a highly practiced mask of tragic vulnerability. Beside her sat Mr. Harrington, a slick, high-priced estate litigator whose sharp gray eyes darted around the courtroom with the cold, hungry precision of a predator surveying a defenseless target. They had spent the last 2 hours commanding the courtroom theater, treating my absolute silence as a white flag of total surrender while they proudly attempted to seize our grandfather's multi-million-dollar estate. To anyone watching from the public gallery, it appeared to be a standard, definitive execution of a probate challenge, a routine dismantling of a late billionaire's final wishes. Mr. Harrington adjusted his custom gold cufflinks, leaning heavily against the oak podium as he addressed the bench with a smooth, synthetic resonance that filled the high-ceilinged room. Your Honor, the paper trail mapping the final months of Arthur Vance's life paints a deeply disturbing picture of systemic manipulation, Harrington announced, his voice dripping with an engineered moral outrage. We have presented comprehensive medical affidavits and testimony showing that during his final year, Mr. Vance was suffering from severe, advanced cognitive decline, rendering him entirely incompetent to manage his vast logistical and real estate empire. Our filings demonstrate that his eldest granddaughter, Clara, weaponized her position as his primary live-in caretaker, isolating him from the rest of his natural bloodline to execute a forced, fraudulent revision of his traditional will. We are formally requesting that this court declare the previous estate structures entirely null and void, appoint my client, Alyssa, as the sole independent administrator of the assets, and initiate an immediate forensic freeze on all corporate accounts. Alyssa offered a loud, theatrical sob into a lace handkerchief, her shoulders shaking with a brilliant display of mock grief that caused our father, Richard, sitting in the front row of the gallery, to offer a slow, triumphant nod. Richard adjusted the lapels of his expensive wool suit, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing across his lips as he looked at me with an unyielding arrogance that had defined my entire childhood. They believed they had executed the perfect legal ambush. They believed that because I had spent years quietly managing grandfather's daily medications and holding his hand in the dark, I lacked the teeth to fight back in an elite corporate arena. For 5 long years, while Alyssa was vacationing in the south of France and Richard was draining his own auxiliary business accounts to fund his luxury country club lifestyle, I was the one surviving the grueling emotional toll of grandfather's terminal illness. I was the one who woke up at 3 in the morning to soothe his terrors, the one who negotiated with international maritime shipping boards to keep his legacy stable, and the one who endured the crushing weight of his fading strength. They had viewed my quiet devotion as a sign of absolute weakness, a submissive compliance that they could easily run over with a single stack of fabricated medical challenges and high-priced legal threats. They genuinely believed that their unearned luxury lifestyle was about to be permanently restored by the stroke of a probate judge's pen, completely blind to the fact that their own insatiable greed had walked them straight into an ironclad trap. Judge Evelyn Rowe cleared her throat, her sharp, analytical eyes peering over her gold-rimmed reading glasses as she looked down from the high judicial bench at my silent table. Ms. Vance, your counsel has remained entirely silent during these severe allegations of undue influence and cognitive manipulation, Judge Rowe stated, her tone carrying a heavy, definitive weight. Do you have any formal structural evidence, any counter-affidavits, or any legal response to present before this court moves forward with the emergency administration freeze? Before I could even reach for the latch of my portfolio, the heavy mahogany double doors at the rear of the courtroom were violently thrown open, cutting through the heavy silence like a physical thunderclap. The sudden movement caused the court reporter's fingers to instantly freeze over her machine, every head in the room snapping backward in a rush of pure, unadulterated confusion. Walking down the center aisle with a rigid, clinical discipline was a man dressed in a bespoke, charcoal gray corporate suit, his face a mask of absolute, unyielding professional authority. It was Harrison Caldwell, the senior managing director of the Private Wealth and Global Trust Division at Hawthorne National Bank, one of the most powerful institutional fiduciary entities in the country. He was flanked by two senior federal estate litigators carrying heavy, black Kevlar briefcases sealed with institutional security hashes that gleamed brightly under the courtroom chandeliers. Harrison Caldwell stepped past the bar, completely ignoring the stunned, gaping expressions of Alyssa and Mr. Harrington as he approached the center podium with a measured, definitive stride. "Your Honor, may it please the court," Harrison Caldwell announced, his deep, booming voice carrying a freezing, absolute authority that made the air in the room feel instantly heavy. "I am here today representing Hawthorne National Bank in our official capacity as the designated, sole corporate trustee of the Arthur Vance Legacy Trust Network. The probate filings presented by Mr. Harrington this morning are not only entirely irrelevant, but they constitute a massive, fraudulent misrepresentation of the decedent's structural assets. The late Arthur Vance did not leave behind a standard personal will subject to the jurisdiction of this probate court, nor did he possess any personal real estate titles at the hour of his passing. 6 months prior to his hospitalization, Mr. Vance executed a total, comprehensive asset migration, transferring his entire $15 million shipping empire, his historic properties, and his liquid investment portfolios into an unassailable revocable turn-to-revocable trust structure. The moment his breathing ceased, that trust network permanently hardened into an absolute, independent legal entity, completely removing the entire estate from the jurisdiction of standard probate challenges or family will contests. The devastating plot twist hidden within his words struck Alyssa's table with the force of a physical explosion, the color rapidly draining from Mr. Harrington's face as his legal framework dissolved into pure ash. A revocable living trust that automatically hardens into an irrevocable structure upon death is the ultimate, gold standard fortress of modern asset protection architecture. It means that there is no will to contest, no public probate process to exploit, and absolutely no legal avenue for disgruntled relatives to claim a right to the inheritance lines. The trust assets are governed exclusively by the private provisions of the corporate trustee, a multi-billion-dollar bank that answers to absolutely nothing but the explicit, written directives of the grantor. Mr. Harrington stumbled backward against his leather chair, his hands violently trembling as he tried to shuffle his notes, his voice cracking under the sudden surge of adrenaline. This is an unprecedented procedural ambush, Your Honor," Harrington shouted, his face turning a dark, aggressive shade of red as he looked at the judge. "We have active claims of severe elder abuse and cognitive manipulation that predate the establishment of this alleged trust network. The family has a right to review the internal corporate disclosures." Harrison Caldwell offered a cold, calculating smile, his eyes locking onto Alyssa and Richard with a freezing intensity that silenced the room completely. "We anticipated your claims of elder abuse, Mr. Harrington, because the late Arthur Vance knew the exact biological composition of the parasites sharing his last name," Caldwell stated smoothly. Grandfather had spent his final months sitting in his leather armchair behind his private study desk, fully aware that the moment his eyes closed, his family would descend upon his legacy like vultures. Caldwell reached into his briefcase, pulling out a heavy, sealed black leather binder containing a certified, explicit letter of instruction and an encrypted biometric storage drive. "With the court's permission, we are entering the decedent's formal instruct letter and his archived, verified audio logs directly into the permanent judicial record," Caldwell announced, connecting the drive to the courtroom's centralized media interface. Judge Rowe nodded gravely, signaling her bailiff to activate the speakers as Alyssa sat frozen in her seat, her knuckles turning stark white as she clutched her lace handkerchief. A soft, digital chime echoed through the high rafters of the courtroom, followed instantly by a sound that made my father, Richard, violently gasp for air as he bolted upright in his gallery seat. It was the voice of our grandfather, Arthur Vance, not the weak, fading whisper of a dying patient, but the booming, resonant, and entirely brilliant tone of a sovereign commander ruling his empire. If my voice is currently echoing through a public courtroom, it means my daughter Alyssa and my son Richard have officially launched their long-awaited campaign of lies against my estate, grandfather's voice stated, every syllable sharp and carrying an immense clinical clarity. I am recording these logs on the afternoon of October 14th, surrounded by my senior corporate physicians and 3 independent neuroscientists who have just finalized my monthly cognitive evaluation. The certified medical summaries attached to this drive document that my mind is entirely pristine, my cognitive faculties are operating at peak efficiency, and my decisions are born of pure, unadulterated free will. I want it explicitly understood by any court of law that my eldest granddaughter, Clara, has never once attempted to influence my financial infrastructure or alter my lineage distributions. She has been my single sanctuary, my protector, and the only member of this family who treated my existence with true, unforced love while the rest of you were treating my terminal illness like a countdown to a liquidation sale. Richard, you and Alyssa have spent the last 12 months hiding behind your country club titles, attempting to coerce my private banking managers and drafting fraudulent deeds to steal my commercial assets while I lay in a hospital bed. I engineered this irrevocable trust structure with Hawthorne National Bank for the explicit purpose of locking you out of my life's work forever. And I have left an absolute avalanche of evidence behind me to ensure your greed becomes the instrument of your own destruction. The audio file faded into a dead, suffocating silence, leaving the courtroom in an absolute vacuum of shock that left Alyssa's legal team entirely paralyzed and utterly speechless. The unassailable proof of grandfather's total mental competency and his explicit, recorded intent completely annihilated their claims of cognitive decline and undue influence within less than 5 minutes. But the true, spectacular climax of the courtroom drama was about to unfold from the heavy double doors at the rear of the room once again. The sharp, heavy click of duty boots echoed across the marble floor as a uniformed deputy sheriff, accompanied by 2 investigators from the state white-collar fraud division, entered the bar. They didn't approach the podium to serve simple civil process papers or deliver standard administrative injunctions. They marched with a definitive, unyielding stride directly toward the head table. The lead fraud investigator stopped behind my father, Richard, and my sister, Alyssa, pulling a stack of high-priority warrants from his heavy tactical folder. Richard Vance and Alyssa Vance, you are officially under arrest under the authority of the state prosecutor's office, the investigator announced, his voice clear and resonant so that every person in the gallery heard the indictment. You are being charged with multiple felony counts of grand larceny, identity theft, and a historical multi-thousand-dollar deed forgery scheme caught in progress. Our forensic real estate units have fully mapped the fraudulent conveyance documents you executed 3 months ago, proving you forged Arthur Vance's notary stamps to illegally transfer ownership of his commercial port warehouses into your private shell companies. The paper trail is entirely complete, and your frozen corporate bank lines have already been seized by the state as the active instruments of a criminal enterprise. Alyssa let out a horrified, breathless shriek of pure psychological collapse, her designer mourning veil tearing away as she violently shoved her chair back from the table, her body visibly shaking with a frantic panic. "Mom, do something. Tell them it's a mistake." Alyssa screamed out toward the empty gallery, her weaponized, arrogant confidence completely dissolving into a pathetic, desperate weeping. Richard tried to resist, puffing out his chest and shouting obscenities about his constitutional rights, but the uniformed deputy sheriff didn't offer him a single second of sympathy or debate. With a swift, mechanical precision, the deputy forced Richard's arms behind his back, sliding the cold, heavy steel handcuffs over his wrists with a sharp, metallic click that echoed through the silent room. They were aggressively led down the center aisle of the courtroom in full view of the local business journalists and court staff, their pristine social status and high society pride violently shattered in a matter of seconds. As they were escorted through the double doors into the dark hallway to await criminal processing, Harrison Caldwell stepped back to the center podium, his fingers turning to the final page of the heavy black trust folder. "Your Honor, there is one final, mechanical clause within the Arthur Vance Legacy Trust that requires the formal acknowledgement of this court before we adjourn," Caldwell stated, his tone dripping with a chilling level of legal satisfaction. Grandfather had explicitly anticipated their courtroom challenge, and he had personally engineered a zero-tolerance, no-contest, in terrorem clause within the foundational bylaws of the Irrevocable Trust Network. Under the strict provisions of Section 14, if any beneficiary or contingent lineage member attempts to file a formal challenge, a probate contest, or a lawsuit against the trust's distributions, their rights are instantly, unilaterally terminated. Because Alyssa and Richard officially filed their fraudulent probate petitions this morning, the zero-tolerance clause has been automatically activated by our corporate compliance systems. Alyssa Vance is officially, permanently stripped of any contingent distribution, any minor family allowance, and any future trust protections she was scheduled to inherit over her lifetime. She has been legally erased from the lineage deeds of this empire, leaving her completely exposed to the state's criminal prosecutions, utterly bankrupt, and entirely penniless without a single cent to fund her defense lawyers. Judge Rowe slammed her heavy wooden gavel down with a definitive, ringing thunderclap that signaled the absolute finality of the family's destruction. This probate petition is dismissed with prejudice, the corporate trust structure stands as fully intact, and this court is releasing the entire asset empire to the exclusive control of the designated managing director, Judge Rowe decreed. The pacing of the entire narrative slowed down beautifully as the chaotic theater of the courtroom slowly emptied, leaving the massive, oak-paneled room in a state of profound, peaceful serenity. The high-priced attorneys packed up their empty briefcases and hurried out the side doors, desperate to distance their firms from the toxic stench of a multi-million-dollar criminal fraud expose. I stood up slowly from my defense table, my posture entirely calm, relaxed, and fully liberated from the heavy ghosts of my childhood isolation. I walked over to Harrison Caldwell, gently accepting the master cryptographic keys and the pristine gold-embossed folders of the business empire that now rested securely under my exclusive, unilateral command. I looked out through the massive glass windows of the courtroom at the city streets below, watching the transport vehicles carry my toxic father and sister away to the county jail facilities where their unearned pride carried exactly zero value. There was no grand, emotional celebration, and there were no tears of artificial sorrow shed over the legal paperwork, because true victory is a quiet, mathematical certainty that doesn't require a public display. Grandfather had spent his entire life building a global logistics and shipping empire on a foundation of pure merit, absolute integrity, and unyielding discipline, and his legacy was finally safe from the hands of the thieves who shared his last name. I had turned the coldest family betrayal into a masterpiece of absolute self-worth, walking out of that probate court not as an invisible caretaker, but as the sovereign commander of my own destiny. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are the child whose quiet dedication and hard work have been systematically walked over by the parasites in your own home, hear me clearly. Your value is never defined by the absolute blindness or the predatory greed of a toxic household dynamic that refuses to see your worth. Strength does not mean enduring financial fraud, emotional neglect, or legal manipulation for the sake of a fake family unity that only serves the criminals in your life. True power is born the exact moment you stop begging for the validation of people who trade love for currency, and you begin to use your own brilliant mind to establish unbreakable walls around your future. My courtroom victory was a beautiful achievement, a complete deployment of forensic trust strategy that permanently shielded my grandfather's memory from the hands of malice. But the true victory, the one that allowed me to look into the mirror every single morning with a peaceful, confident smile, was the absolute freedom of knowing that I am more than enough. Home is not a geographic structure defined by a shared surname, a genetic code, or the toxic obligation to sacrifice your youth for people who treat your existence like a convenience. Home is where your boundaries are treated as absolute, where your hard work is genuinely honored, and above all else, home is where you are respected.